so much. And she'll the one who like clean up and gets everything in position, and she will make sure that the meals is good, and she's a great cooker. So yeah.
The 25-year-old Fatima was a space engineer and an aspiring astronaut, and was reportedly moving from Germany to Perth after being offered an internship at IBM. On Saturday, 2 Australian Air Force transport planes departed eastern Ukraine with the final batch of remains of the victims of the crash. With 193 of the 298 victims being Dutch, the government has taken lead responsibility in the international effort to recover and identify the bodies and investigate the cause of the crash.
We therefore have decided to stay back. We reassess the situation continuously and will start to redeploy tomorrow morning back to the site should the situation change.
Dutch Foreign Minister Frans Timmermans says, "We need to make sure that every single Dutch person is returned to the Netherlands." Many of the passengers on the flight to Kuala Lumpur were tourists, but at least 6 were AIDS experts on their way to an AIDS conference in Melbourne, Australia. Australia has promised to support the investigation.
My Prime Minister, Tony Abbott, has been in contact with President Putin on a number of occasions, and we are hopeful that the Russians will use their influence over the separatists to ensure that we can have unimpeded access to the site. And so today is our first opportunity to test that, and we are hopeful that we'll be able to get to the site today and commence to carry out the work.
But gaining access to the crash site has been rather tough for investigators as gunmen chased them from the site. Meanwhile, fierce fighting around the crash site area in eastern Ukraine has further complicated any investigation. International monitors said on Sunday that the fighting itself could affect the crash site, underlining the growing complexity of trying to establish who shut down the plane. They announced on Sunday they would be abandoning their visit to the site.
The situation has rapidly changed, and as normal in this conflict, the front lines were not very clear. It was a very blurred picture, and we have reassessed the situation. That included a small reconnaissance team that we have sent out later in the afternoon and have tried to approach the site, and we have been stopped.
And while investigators are not sure when they will begin work at the site, the Dutch continue to mourn their dead.
Now, earlier I spoke to Professor Isaac Mbachu about why it is important to find out who downed the plane and what happens after the culprit is identified.
Yeah, at the long run, all fingers should point at Russia because the surface-to-air missile and air-to-air missile used in downing the civil aircraft and the military aircraft of Ukraine couldn't have come from the US, except from Russia. So we're talking about sophisticated anti-aircraft missiles that can only come from Russia. So this is why the West, everybody is pointing accusing fingers on Russia because surface-to-surface missile and air-to-air missiles are highly sophisticated anti-aircraft missiles. The US couldn't have manufactured them overnight. So where else could they come from if not Russia?
Investigations are about to begin, although they're being stalled because of the fighting that's currently going on in Ukraine. What should investigators be looking for at the site of the crash?
First of all, they have already gotten the the black box. But that is not enough. The investigators will be looking for the remaining bodies of the crash. There are so many, up to 20 to 30 bodies have not been accounted for. Because there were almost 295 persons in the aircraft. On the far, they have gotten about 250. So the remaining are still unaccounted for. 1. 2, the investigators will be looking for unassailable evidence that will be the origin of the anti-aircraft missile that shot the plane down. But this is something that the rebels wouldn't want the investigators to look into. So if the investigators from Australia, from Netherlands, possible from Britain, if they can lay hands on the remains of the downed aircraft, they will be able to piece it together. In fact, find the missing link that would actually tell the type of surface-to-surface missile or air-to-air missile that shot down the plane.
Professor, does Ukraine bear any responsibility in what has happened?
Ukraine is part of the belligerent groups. In other words, Ukraine is fighting the rebels. One cannot categorically rule out that, to some extent, Ukraine should bear the blame. Ukraine is fighting the insurgents, the rebels, and nobody is sure actually whether the Ukrainian forces shot down the plane or the rebels. But it is 90% certain that the Malaysian aircraft was shot down by the rebels, because that was not the first time that they shot down an aircraft. In fact, before shooting down the Malaysian aircraft, they had already shot down 3 Ukrainian military jets. And even after that, recently they shot down another 2 military jets.
I know that the international community, especially the European Union, is discussing sanctions on Russia. But what happens if investigations are eventually carried out and Russia or even Ukraine is found guilty of having shot down that plane? What happens apart from sanctions?
Yeah, see, the problem is that the European countries are at a crossroads. When you talk of sanctions, I don't think they will do more than they have already done. Germany receives 70% of natural gas from Russia. In fact, European members of EU rely so heavily on Russia for their gas, for their heating gas, for their cooking gas. So it's not feasible, it's not practicable for them to simply give a decisive blow on Russia, because Russia can equally respond by cutting off gas supply to Western Europe, and then the consequences. If Russia cut the gas, if Russia should sever the link or cut off the gas supply to Western Europe, it is not Russia that will suffer it more, but the European countries will be in terrible mess, honestly speaking, because very soon the winter will set in and they will obviously beg Russia for gas. So the sanction, it is only US that can boast of sanction and implement it. But Germany, Italy, Britain, France,